Uh, Thank you all so much for coming. This is the Southern Christian Coalition. I am Joe Sharon, organizer with that Southern Christian Coalition. I want to introduce you all to our panel today. We have with us on the call the Reverend Brandon Gilvin, a senior minister at First Christian Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We have Reverend Don Bennett, pastor of The Table in Nashville, Tennessee. And we have Reverend Elizabeth H. Doolin, who's Director of Young Adult Ministry at the Idlewild Presbyterian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. And she is also the UKirk campus minister for the Presbytery of Mid-South, covering the University of Memphis and Rhodes College. Before we get started, I'd like to just say a real quick prayer that as we gather here in this digital space to give voice to the complaints of the vulnerable and to call our elected leaders to account, God, that you would grant that your spirit reach the hearts of those leaders, those powerful folks here in Tennessee who hold so much in their hands, and that you would give them the heart to do what is right for your people. God, grant that the words of our mouths that we speak here today and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. And thank you all, you attendees, for coming here today. We are here to speak about the injustice of the situation here in Tennessee as we reopen. Workers are required to return to their places of business, but there is no structure in the Tennessee Pledge to ensure that those workplaces are actually safe. So speaking first on that, Reverend Brandon Gilvin.
Well, I would first of all say that kind of based on all of the models, all of the data that we have available, that this is a pretty clear example of a premature return to business as usual. With this virus, there's so much unknown concerning a number of factors around transmission, and the best thing that we can do in terms of public health is to incentivize flattening the curve, and that we're essentially doing the opposite of that with this demand that folks get back to work. And I think one of the things that happens with that is we're deflecting the responsibility from the state of Tennessee to maintain a sense of public health. And unfortunately, the language that's being used in doing that uses language of personal liberty or fiscal responsibility, and yet it puts workers in an impossible bind where they're either going to have to risk their health or risk their job. So essentially, we're reopening at a dangerous time. We're forcing workers back in, but we're providing no guarantee to them that employers are going to be working on their behalf to create a safe work environment. And essentially, that widens or maybe even reveals another have and have not fracture in our communities. There are those who have the means or flexibility to choose to be healthy at home, and then there are those who do not. And I certainly, as a faith leader, have been considering the words of Isaiah 10, which are in line, with so many of the other prophetic voices of the Hebrew Bible that recognize that part of our life of faith is to center the needs of the poor in what we as 21st century people might call our social compact or social contract. And Governor Lee, because he speaks so often about the role of his faith in his leadership, I really wish that he would remember that is part of his call as well, to take care of the vulnerable, to make sure that all of our laws and policies not only keep the poor, keep the vulnerable in mind, but keep them at the center of our policy.
Thank you, Reverend Gilvin. Next, we go to the Reverend Don Bennett of The Table in Nashville. Reverend Bennett.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for the opportunity to be on the call. My concern as a pastor, my primary call is to work with folks who are identified in vulnerable people groups. And most often those people groups are not folks with huge financial means. And my concern with the governor's return to work and these guidelines are that it does not ensure that we keep an eye looking toward the least of these. And that is what we are called to do as Christians. That's what Jesus would have us to do. Governor Lee, in my opinion, has not only allowed state economics to turn away from caring about the least of these, but he has in effect said, I'm concerned about these, the least. And it's a very big concern. It also, for me, it appears to create somewhat of a double bind. Particularly, I was on the state website, the Department of Labor and Workforce Development earlier, and the state has developed a link that employers can report employees who will not come back to work. And so now employers are now poised to criminalize folks who refuse to come to work. And these are pastors, or these are families with young children most often, particularly in the hospitality industry. As a pastor, I've got a huge problem with that. Criminalizing folks who are already living on the bottom end of the economic scale here in our state. And as a faith leader, I can tell you, like I'm sure all of the other pastors here on this call can attest, that faith communities prior to this pandemic were places where folks could go and visit our food pantries. We would be able to help out with expenses from time to time for utilities and such like. The coffers at our churches, the monies were designated to help the least of these, right? But the reality is everybody is struggling now. And so churches are struggling right along with these folks who have some pretty deep and well-warranted concerns about taking care of their family and looking toward the health and welfare of their family. And it just appears that these guidelines are not doing that. Governor Lee has chosen economics over empathy, and that simply is not the way of Christ.
Thank you, Reverend Bennett. And lastly, we'll hear from the Reverend Elizabeth H. Doolin of Idlewild Presbyterian in Newkirk, Memphis.
Thank you, Joe. So I echo the concerns shared by Reverend Bennett and Reverend Gilvin. Many Tennesseans are currently facing what seems like a catch-22: return to work and face the possibility of contracting coronavirus and passing it on to their loved ones, or stay home and stay healthy but have no income. I cannot imagine having to make this decision, nor do I think this is a decision anyone should be forced to make. While the CARES Act protects some people from facing this dilemma, there are so many more people who should be protected. As it stands, the Tennessee Pledge is, for all practical purposes, a set of suggestions to employers, as there's currently no plan to effectively enforce these safety measures among businesses. Employees cannot be sure that their places of employment will provide proper safety precautions, and thus face decisions that no one should have to make. Health, or making a car payment, hospitalization or eviction notices, transmitting this disease to my kids, or my kids not having enough to eat. As a pastor, I am called to say that the possibility of anyone having to make this decision is a moral issue. Time after time again in the New Testament, we see that one of the primary concerns of Jesus is making sure that nobody is excluded from the means to flourish. In his many miracles curing people from sickness and disease, we see that Jesus desires healing and health for all humankind. In the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus tells his disciples that all who have come to hear him must be fed, and we see that Jesus desires that no person go hungry. In the parable of the workers in the vineyard, where all workers are paid an equal amount, we see that Jesus desires that all, no matter their situation, be paid a living wage. Jesus shows us the importance of everyone having the opportunity to live life abundantly. The God that we worship shows us constantly in Scripture what it means to love our neighbor, which is to ensure that all people have the ability to not merely survive, but also to thrive. We have seen examples of Governor Lee heeding Christ's call for inclusion, like he did in advocating that Tennessee continue resettling refugees in our state. Governor Lee displayed bravery in disagreeing with many of his colleagues, stating that he felt that he could not turn his back on people fleeing from danger. I hope that Governor Lee, as a fellow Christian, will heed this call today as well. I hope that he will follow the gospel message and work to make sure that no Tennessean is faced with this lose-lose situation. I hope that he issues a mandate that businesses comply with the Tennessee Pledge and enforces it, ensuring the safety of our workers. I hope that Governor Lee and our state leaders will work to ensure that all might have the right to safety and economic stability. No one should have to choose one over the other.
Thank you so much, Reverend Doohan. I'm going to bring this these prepared remarks to a close in just a minute by putting a quick and fine point on this. Many of us here at the Southern Christian Coalition share Governor Lee's commitment and value of personal liberty, and it would be wonderful if simply the moral obligation that employers face to keep their workers and keep their businesses safe places during the COVID-19 pandemic were enough to ensure action. But unfortunately, just like we saw during the stay-at-home order, an order without enforcement, without a mandate, is not one that people are willing to follow. If we're going to be in the real world, if we're going to take that responsibility as governor to govern, it's important that Governor Lee use the power invested in him by the state of Tennessee to keep Tennesseans safe. And that is the crux of our message here today. And with that, we are going to turn things over to Q&A. It looks like everybody on the call is using Zoom today. If you would go ahead and use the hand button, we will be able to put you on the audio and get your question asked. We'll give just a little bit of time for that. And while we're waiting for any questions, I just want to again thank our panel for coming on, thank our three speakers. We really appreciate your prophetic witness to what this moment calls for, and we're grateful for your time. I'm not seeing any questions either in the chat or through the Zoom function itself. It's possible that we're having some difficulty. This wouldn't be the first time that Zoom has not helped us be able to ask questions. So with that, I think we're going to call going once, twice, and end the press conference. Thank you all so much for coming. Our panelists will all be available for questions by email, and if they consent, we'll get the phone numbers out too, and we'll get the recording out later this afternoon. Thank you all.